So, Risa's very kindly agreed to come along this evening. She's been co-chair of the Ninewells Residents Association for what, 3 years now?
Too long. About 3 years.
And, she and I have talked a lot over that period about things that are working there and things that aren't working there and what we can do to try and help the things that aren't working there. And we thought it would be really useful just to kind of expose some of that to a broader public today. So how did you come to live on Ninewells, and how was it kind of sold to you? What expectations did you have?
Right. Before I answer, I wanted to thank Sam and the forum for having me and for giving us, the RA, the opportunity to share our experience with you, because I do think it will be useful going forward as new developments are built. To answer your question, so I think the considerations for my family were convenience. My husband works on the biomedical campus. My daughter goes to the Purse, so they could walk very easily. The fact that it was a new build meant maintenance was likely to be less, that the quality of the build was likely to be good, which is generally true. We like the natural elements within the development. For those who maybe haven't been on it, there are ponds, there are green spaces, there are meandering areas. It's lovely. And it's close to the open space. So at the moment there's a field there. I don't know how long it'll be unbuilt upon. But you've got Wandlebury and you've got Gog Magog and so forth. So it's nice. We enjoy being more on the fringe rather than in the denser parts of the city. I think as far as expectations, the one thing I will say is I was aware in reading through all the documentation you have to read through when you're buying a property of the bylaws. So Ninewells has private rules. For instance, everything from you can't hang laundry out on your balconies to you can't rent your home as an Airbnb, and other rules in between. So I expected that those rules would be enforced and kind of didn't think much about it. That's not exactly what's come to pass. So I think that's where things stood when we first moved in.
Yeah. And how did the RA come to be set up, and how did you get involved?
Right. So we were one of the first families to move in. I would say within about 4 or 5 months' time, there might have been maybe 10 families at that point, because we were in phase 1, so they were still building around us. And it was sort of lonely, and it was a construction site, so we all bonded and got to know each other and became friends and decided, wouldn't it be nice to have a picnic in the summer? And there's a green space that's in the development. So we all kind of coordinated that and chipped in, and it was very well attended, even though there weren't a lot of people yet. I think by that time, by the time of the picnic, maybe there were 20 or 25 households. So a lot of people came and really expressed an interest in continuing an RA, in building community, and wanting to know how they could get in touch with one another and stay connected. So along with my co-chair Rachel Edwards, who's not able to come tonight, we just sort of kind of took it upon ourselves to create an informal residents association with the buy-in of those who were already living there. And I turned to Sam to say, what do I do? How do I do this? And Sam very kindly helped me to figure that out. So it was really about building community, or trying to build community. And we didn't really have any outreach at all from the city. I've come to learn that what the city did, what its kind of community office was required to do, was to treat Trumpington Meadows, Clay Farm, and Ninewells all as one southern fringe area, and the community officers were dispatched to the other two developments, which you may know are geographically nowhere near Ninewells and separated by railroad tracks and et cetera. And so we weren't offered any help at all. We really just started by asking people if they wanted to provide information. We set up a residence directory, so we made a spreadsheet and we just started filling it in with everybody's information in the early days.
So I think what you're saying is it's my fault, actually, you ended up doing this. But okay, moving on. Let's think about the positives first. So what things do work about the development from residents' perspective? Because, you know, the survey showed that there are a lot of positive comments.
Yeah. No, I think overall, when you're talking about the development itself, it's a lovely place to live. I think for the most part, people will say the homes are well built. Some have had their share of problems with snagging and some other things, which I won't go into, but overall, it's a pretty high quality of build. I think people do feel that it's very safe, that it's, I think, peaceful there. It's nicely maintained, although a lot of that is due to the RA. So I think it's also great for people who want to work at the biomedical campus and want to be in easy reach, who don't want the commute. So it has attracted a good number of people who work there, and I think that's nice.
And then looking at the flip side of it, what hasn't worked so well? How would you summarise some of the conversations we've had in the last few years?
Yeah. I think there are two main things that I would raise in broad strokes. The first is that it's really difficult to build community where there's nowhere for people to gather. So we don't have a community center. We don't have shops. We don't have amenities. As Sam said, you know, you take your life in your hands during a flu epidemic to go into Addenbrooks to get your milk or whatever. And that's been a real problem. We have had initiatives we've wanted to work on, everything from pensioners, sitting in on playgroups with the young children. We have a lot of young kids, we have a lot of elderly. We had all kinds of different ideas, but there's nowhere to do it. The closest location would be the Nightingale Park Pavilion, but that's been closed for 4 years. So it's really hindered the ability to kind of grow community. It's better in the warmer months when people might be out and about, but it's not ideal. The second problem has been, a real education for me. I think I've learned a lot in the 3 years I've been doing this. So I think it's fair to say that our experience has been that, developers want to build homes. They're not so interested in the residents who are living on the site while it's still being built. That's not their first priority. And for those of you who may not know, until a site is fully built and until the city accepts handover of that site and will then begin, for instance, maintenance of parks and so forth, collection of rubbish, what have you, the developer is responsible for that maintenance. And in Ninewells' case, and presumably in all these new developments, the developer will hire a management company to help with that. So what has happened has been that there's really been a failure to enforce the private rules. There's been no initiative, let's put it that way, to enforce them. So we've had a couple of units that have rented themselves out. Their owners have rented them out as Airbnbs, causing a lot of problems. The developer didn't have much interest in that until we pressed, and I can talk about that more later. issues, all kinds of issues with parking, with putting up signage around parking. And then also with maintenance issues. So we've had a huge problem with dead trees, both because new trees weren't watered, because the landscaper would run the lawnmowers into the trees and kill them. Weeding wasn't done. Rubbish bins were overflowing, repeatedly overflowing. We've had a lack of consideration. You know, all, contractors you see, we are considerate contractors. Does anyone see those big signs? Well, not so much. You know, we've had roads closed, you know, really at very inconvenient junctions for days, with residents having received no notice at all. Even after talking to the developer and getting assurances that in future, if there were closures, we would be advised. No, that hasn't happened. Pavements, you know, when they're repaving the pavements to build them up, there's no care, there's no thought for people who might be in wheelchairs. The way the signage is done, you know, we'd have people, you know, using their wheelchairs getting almost all the way to the end of the development, only to find that they couldn't cross the road, they couldn't get through, there was nowhere to go. Things like a notice board, which I will say the developer didn't have an obligation to put in, did put in at the RA's request, but waited until the entire development was built before putting it up. Playground built last. And, you know, then we have the development plans and some of the, what I call shortcuts that are taken. And I can talk more about this later too, but we call our playground for older kids the Aqua Park. That's what, you know, I also call a twofer, right? So you have to have drainage, and you also are required to have a certain amount of space for recreation. And somehow the planners agreed that a playground could be built essentially in a drainage pond, such that occasionally it would be expected to flood. Expected to flood. I mean, what's happened now is the drainage has never been correctly, it's never worked correctly, and so it's sort of a small pond. Again, did we get any notice about that from the developer? We're sorry, or you know, here's what's going on, you can expect some improvement by this date, just to update you. Nothing. And I mean, the number of emails that have been going around, the frustration and anger that's come up around that topic has been more than on any other topic that I've seen in the last 3 years. So I think lack of consideration and lack of initiative in enforcing the private rules have been real problems.
So, sort of moving the focus out a little bit further, to what extent do you feel Ninewells has been successfully incorporated into Queen Edith more generally? I mean, it's called an urban fringe site. That word fringe is quite important, both kind of geographically and emotionally. How involved do you think Ninewells is in the wider neighbourhood?
You know, it's hard for me to answer on an individual level. We certainly have families whose children go to the local schools, and I see them walking across, you know, Babraham Road. I know people there who have lived in or near the area before and have moved into Ninewells, and I presume that they maintain their ties. But I do think it's difficult. I do think it feels isolated. Consider where it is geographically. You've got Babraham Road there. And there's no pedestrian crossing near the entrance to Ninewells. So you have to either walk quite a distance to cross towards Nightingale. They're supposed to be putting in a crossing further down the other way. So there's no real permeability, I think, when it comes to that. And again, I think that because the nearest shops are in the hospital, someone's going to go there rather perhaps than go to Woolston Way or go somewhere else. So it keeps you insulated, I think.
Okay. Wrapping up then, what would you say? You've got someone from the Shared Planning Service here tonight. You've got developers from GB2 at the back of the room also listening in. If you were going to give them some takeaways for how this has worked for you and what you would like to see done differently another time, what would you say?
I would say that building community is just as important as building the houses. So I think that gets lost. I think the specific things I would say are to consider the amenities and the idea of a community center. My understanding is that in Cambridge, new developments of under a certain size are not required to build a community center. I think that's incredibly short-sighted because what it does is it creates sort of a false distinction. So Ninewells has about 260 units, and I think GB1 and GB2 are going to have each roughly the same. That's not big enough for a community center, says the city, even though I can tell you that the need is there. But the reality is it's 750 homes, right, in a very small space. But if each developer is not required to build because it's too small, what does that mean, right? The other thing that I think is really interesting, are you familiar with the Ironworks, which is a new development over on Mill Road by the railroad tracks there? So,
Sorry, I was translating for Risa, railway.
A railway, sorry, my Americanisms. So that has 118 units, which is half the size, less than half the size of Ninewells. And it is a community investment partnership program between the city and the developer it's one area that will provide some affordable housing, it's mixed. They have a community center. Now they're on Mill Road, where there's everything there, and there's only 118 units. They get a community center. I mean, this needs to be, I think it really, really needs to be addressed. The other quick things I'll say are that I don't think that developers should be allowed to put in infrastructure, more homes, whatever, at the expense of the recreation and the amenities, no more aqua parks. And I also think it would be great if they were required to help form RAs, have a website where new residents can go and chat and talk and find out how to sign up, perhaps, to a directory. Maybe provide some resources. I will say that our developer in the first year contributed some money to our very first picnic. It was the only year they did it, but that was very nice, very nice. So I think those are some of the things that would suggest that might make it better for those moving into future new developments in this area.
And I think the other thing that's required is some people running the RA who are really determined to make it work, and Risa and Rachel have been absolutely tenacious and have had to be absolutely tenacious, and they've made a huge difference, and I'm really grateful to her for coming along tonight. We probably won't do questions now. If you'd like to come and talk to either of us during the interval, please do that. I'm conscious that we're running a bit late. So maybe we can reconvene at 8 o'clock, 8:05 at a push, if that's all right. I hope that first half of the evening has been interesting. Thank you.